Good afternoon, everybody. I should express my special thanks to Dr. Rahimi, Dr. Davari, Dr. Farzaneh, and Dr. Qaisari, and all the sponsors of University of California at San Diego. So, the topic of my presentation today is about between tradition and modernity, reforming Islamic thought through structural ijtihad, or ijtihad in the foundation and principles. I mean by ijtihad, independent reasoning. Ijtihad has been the motor of dynamism of Islam from inside for several centuries, and it worked well. According to this method, the Muslim scholars, mostly jurists or fuqaha, refer to the Quran and to the tradition of Prophet to find the practical duties of believers, or we can call it Sharia. The ordinances of Sharia, or al-ahkam al-shar'iyya, that were introduced to the believers by the jurists satisfied the believers. They enjoyed practicing these ordinances or these religious rules, and the order of Muslim lives continued without difficulty for several centuries. When a new problem occurred, the jurists found its solution according to their traditional method of ijtihad. If they did not find clearly their response in the scripture or the tradition, a few techniques in each school, such as consensus, al-ijma', analogy, al-qiyas, and the sisters of analogy in different schools of Muslim law, reason assisted them. Reason means al-aql, assisted them to find the Sharia ordinances. Since the end of 19th century, it sounded that understanding of fuqaha, or Muslim jurists, Muslim scholars, in the name of Sharia ordinances in some issues do not fit modern life. The area of inconsistency between Islam and modernity gradually expanded. It was not only a few problems or a small area of Sharia ordinances, but at the second decade of 21st century, it is almost whole of the non-ritual ordinances of Sharia. It means if we divide Sharia to two parts, worship or rituals, the first, and human interactions, the second, it covers all non-ritual parts of Sharia, as well as a few parts of rituals. It means that also some parts of ritual is under crisis. It's not only Sharia and practical ordinances, but also theoretical part of Islam in the name of theology. The interpretation of the scripture and the science of tradition, ulum al-hadith, all of them are in the crisis in the 21st century and about 1.5 centuries ago. It's not only a few elites that understood shortcoming of the understanding of the conservative scholars, but also the majority of the modern educated Muslims reached this point. As much as Muslim communities confronted the phenomena of modernity, the problem of inconsistency of Islam and modernity becomes larger, deeper, and more widespread. To be honest, this problem is not exclusive to the Muslims. Jews, Christians, and other traditions, or we can say other Abrahamic traditions, had the same problem and the same experiences. There are three main approaches among the Muslims in this issue. I can find the parallel experience and similarities in other traditions too. The first approach found the problem in the essence of the religions, including Islam. Decline of the religion in the life was the solution. Live as there is no God, or get as God as he died. Subjective or philosophical secularism was the result of the first approach. Happiness is based on living Islam and its out-of-the-date rules. The time of religions, God, and revelation is over. It's the time of reason autonomous. It's the first approach to Islam, and I can tell you other religions. The second approach is accusing modernity for this deviation from religiosity. The solution, according to the second approach, is returning to early Islam and pure teachings of the Prophet and the literal understanding of the scripture. Modernity ruined human spirituality. There were no problem in Islam, Sharia, and understanding of the ulama. The problem is satanic modernity. We may call this approach fundamentalism or ultra-conservatism. The third approach is between these two radicalisms. I think both of these two approaches are radical approaches to Islam or other religions. So my approach and also the approach of my colleagues is between these two. The third approach tries to make a way for consistency of Islam and modernity and to consolidate a product in the name of modern Islam and the process of reforming Islamic thought. We do not want to return to early Islam. Also, we do not want to leave Islam. We want to have Islam in the modern time, but in which way? According to this approach, there exists a big problem. We have a big problem. We should not ignore it as fundamentalists or ultra-conservatives made. We have a problem. We have a crisis. But the problem is not religiosity, God, or revelation. The problem is something else. The problem is not the essence of Islam. The problem is the understanding of the past experts in the modern time. I think this sentence is the abstract of my theory. The problem is the understanding of the past experts in the modern time. The problem is that the product of the Ijtihad of the ulama of the past centuries does not respond to the need of the Muslims in the modern age. What should be changed is the understanding of Islam, not Islam itself. We should change the understanding of ulama. We should not change the religion. Understanding of Islam by Al-Ghazali or Shaykh al-Mufid belonged to their time and their situation, not to our time and our situation. We cannot repeat Al-Ghazali. We cannot repeat Shaykh al-Tusi today in the 21st century. They belong to their centuries. Their understandings belong to their times. We need the Ghazali or Mufid of this time. Although many Muslim experts including theologians, jurists, scripture interpreters, hadith compilers or commentators, philosophers, and mystics, serviced Islamic teachings during 14 centuries, and their services were so respectful, rich, and wonderful, in my opinion, that it's not right to follow them blindly or repeat their works without any revision or run in their framework. This approach, the third approach, is divided to two categories. The first category is the approach of applying traditional ijtihad in response to modern issues. The modern problems are much bigger than the power of traditional method. Most of the problems remained unsolved or were responded in non-satisfactory way. I think the capacity of traditional ijtihad does not fit the modern problems. The second category is insufficiency of traditional ijtihad. There is a spectrum of views in this category, a large spectrum. Some progressive Muslims, such as Muhammad Arkun, Nasr Hamid Abu Zaid, Al-Jabiri, Abdul Karim Surush, Muhammad Mushtahid Shabastari, and Fazlur Rahman, tried to enrich Islamic thought with mysticism, analytic philosophy, spirituality, hermeneutics, and so on. I respect all of them, and you can find many of their ideas also in my presentation or in my network. I think that we learn some things from each of these fields, means mysticism, hermeneutics, and so on. And I respect all of the efforts of these Muslim reformists in this way. But reduction of Islam to Sufism, analytic philosophy, spirituality, rationality, or hermeneutics is not the solution. Comprehensive method is something else. It could be called structural ijtihad, or ijtihad in the foundation and principles, not only in the practical branches of Islam. We should make ijtihad, or we should revise in the method of ijtihad. Some kinds of revision in the principles and foundations of Islamic thought is necessary. The reform should be started beyond and before Sharia. Sharia is a product of this revision. We should not start from Sharia. Sharia is subordinate of many foundations and principles prior to it. The scope of ijtihad is not only Sharia, not only fiqh, and not practical part of Islam. Maybe the first scholar that mentioned this brilliant point was Al-Farabi, not me. At the end of his so famous book, Ihsa al-Ulum, that was translated to many languages about 9 centuries ago, he mentioned this point, that we should make ijtihad not only in fiqh, in practical part, but also in theology, in theoretical part of Islam. And also he divided between 2 kinds of theology or 2 kinds of fiqh. And he called one of it dialectic or kalam al-jadali, dialectic theology, and also dialectic fiqh, al-fiqh al-jadali. And the second one, he said, is something such as fiqh and theology, that Muslims need them without any dialectic, not to prove something for the others, to prove something for themselves. So, the scope of ijtihad, following al-Farabi, is not only Sharia, fiqh, and practical part of Islam, but also theoretical part of Islam, including traditional theology, ethics, interpretation of the scripture, tafsir al-Quran, compiling and commentary of hadith, ulum al-hadith, and so on. It means when I use ijtihad in this presentation, it's not unique to Sharia or fiqh. It covers all Islamic teachings, including Sharia. Sharia is one part of ijtihad, not only the only part. We should start from the methods. The mistake happened in the method of ijtihad, not in the product. The traditional ijtihad is based on a science in the name of usul al-fiqh. Could be translated to the methodology of the jurisprudence, methodology of Sharia. Literally, it means the principles of fiqh. That the better translation is methods of fiqh or Sharia. This science is not exclusive to jurisprudence, in opposition to its name. It includes the methodology of all Islamic texts, I mean the Quran and Hadith. The main part of usul al-fiqh is Muslim linguistic philosophy. The first part of usul al-fiqh is Muslim linguistic philosophy. So we can find in this part many problems some centuries before Frege and his colleagues in this part of usul al-fiqh. The second part is qualification, credibility, reliability, and domain of authority of each of sources of Islamic teachings, including the Quran, the tradition of the Prophet, the consensus, the reason, the analogy, and the sisters, and the custom or urf. We can call it, in the second part is Kitab al-Hujjiyah, the credibility of all of these things. We should start from making some challenge with the credibility of all of these issues, starting from the Quran to the custom as the urf. It's not jurisprudence, it's the method of jurisprudence. And in this type of ijtihad, we need this survey, this study, as the second part of this science. The third part of usul al-fiqh, this science, the methodology of fiqh, is the consolidation of the sources in the time of inconsistency, contradiction, and differences among the scripture and the hadith or other Islamic sources. Textual sources are full of inconsistencies. What should we do in this time? These three major parts of usul al-fiqh are the cornerstone of traditional ijtihad, traditional interpretation of the Quran, traditional hadith commentary, traditional theology, and traditional hadith. Any reform without reconstruction of this traditional methodology is unsuccessful. Usul al-fiqh, or the methodology of jurisprudence, needs reconstruction, not a mild reform. There are a lot of valuable points in it, but it needs enrichment, continuity, and work a lot on it. We may inspire by linguistic philosophy, hermeneutics, and historicity and critical thinking. The role of scholars in understanding the text is ignored in traditional Islam. It's one of the main shortcomings of the traditional ijtihad. It is what we should learn from modern hermeneuticians, such as Schleiermacher or Otto or Gadamer, Hirsch, and the others. The result of this addition is a brilliant point. There could be several real meanings of a text, not only one meaning. There is no standard meaning of a text. Also, the text could be sacred, holy text. Welcome to diversity and inter-religious plurality. Historicity is another major method. The traditional Muslim scholars ignored it, that the traditional Muslims ignored it. Islamic teachings, the same as all other religions, were made gradually in a long term of challenges, evolutions, influence of socio-political and economical, cultural powers. Studying the genealogy of Islamic teachings is required for all Muslim scholars. It includes the genealogy of Islamic dogmas, beliefs, norms, values, and ordinances. Unfortunately, the traditional scholars do not consider the historicity of religion or their sects or their fields. If we do not consider the historicity of all of these things, our understanding is not correct. Critical thinking is one of the most important necessities of constructional ijtihad. Critical thinking is defined as intellectually disciplined process of activity and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, or evaluating information gathered from or generated by observation, experience, reflection, reasoning, or communication as a guide to belief and action. The lack of this method is the big shortcoming of traditional ijtihad. Reconstructing usul al-fiqh is only half of the way as ijtihad in principles. The other part is ijtihad in the foundations. The other half of structural ijtihad means these foundations are epistemological, cosmological, ontological, anthropological, sociological, psychological, theological, and ethical foundations of Islam. If we do not revise in all of these foundations, no revision, no reform in Sharia will be possible. The medieval understanding of these foundations needs reconstruction and revision in all of these foundations. Ptolemy's cosmology has been the cosmology of traditional Muslims as well as the other scholars in the medieval time. The cosmology of the modern Muslim scholar is based on post-Newton's cosmology, and there is a gap, deep gap between these two cosmologies. We cannot say only the cosmology of medieval times is Islam, and we should follow them. Why? What's the reason? Aristotelian epistemology has been dominated on traditional Muslim scholars. The epistemology of modern Muslim scholars is Kantian, not Aristotelian. The ontology of the most traditional Muslim scholars has been based on the principle of differences, or tabayun al-wujud, of the existences. Modern Muslim scholars' ontology is based on principle of gradation and unity of the existence, tashkik al-wujud and wahdat al-wujud. According to the anthropology and ethnology of the traditional Muslim scholars, gender equality is not acceptable. Justice is based on natural merits. Modern Muslim scholars believe in egalitarian justice, as we heard earlier. and gender equality. On the other hand, the religion is the base of different classes of rights for human beings for traditional Muslims, not for the modern Muslims. So not gender, not religion is not the reason for different rights in modern Islam. It was the source of different rights in traditional Islam. According to structural Ijtihad, rights belongs to the human as he or she is a human. So our soul is not male, not female. Our soul, as in the Quran, is the soul of human being, is the manifestation of God. Rights belong to the soul, not to the body. It's what I understand from the scripture. I think it's pure Islamic. What the other scholars, traditional Muslims, understood that something depends on this body, not on the soul, is not correct, was not correct. Or when we want to have the rights, we do not have different classes of rights for different human beings. First class for those who have the same tradition as me. Second class who have more similarities with the others. Third class, those who are far from me. It's medieval understanding approach to the rights. All human beings, regardless of their religions, have the same right. Regardless of their gender, regardless of their color, regardless of their ethnicity, have the same right. We can find this point in the scripture, in the tradition, but also we have other voices. We should try to justify these things. These two foundations produce two different kinds of jurisprudence, fiqh and Sharia. Keep in your mind, a jurist that believes in different classes of rights for human beings produce not egalitarian fiqh, not egalitarian Sharia. He produced something else. It's our problem. The other point about the theological foundation of Islam, we should revise it, not only in the fiqh or Sharia. Who is God? Arbitrary ruler or just Lord? To be honest, the first arbitrary ruler is the God of traditional scholars. And we can say that although Muslim majority following the doctrine of Ash'arite and the minority including the Mu'tazilite and Shiites believe in the just ruler, the output of this fundamental axiom has not been appeared in different aspects of Islamic teaching such as ethics, jurisprudence, and interpretation of the scripture and the hadith. It remains in the theory. We cannot find the manifestation of this understanding of God in these rules that we have. The philosophy of resurrection or hereafter depends on the response to this key question. Who is God? Which of these two is correct? What was the philosophy of prophecy? What is our expectation of religion and revelation? Was religious law ultimate goal of prophecy? This is what traditional Muslim scholars, including philosophers such as Avicenna, theologians such as E.G. or Al-Ghazali, and jurists, almost all of them, claimed. They say the ultimate goal of prophecy or religion is Islamic law, implementation of Islamic law. According to this doctrine, fiqh became the first ranking and the master of all Islamic sciences. If you go to library, maybe 90% of the Islamic books are about fiqh and Sharia. The 10% includes other parts of Islamic science. The second result of this doctrine is about Sharia. Sharia became the system of Islamic law, and Islam became law-oriented religion, such as Judaism. This is a big misunderstanding. It happened in the first century by the companions of the Prophet, by the first generation of Muslim scholars. What is Sharia? Is it correct to say Sharia is the system of law? According to structural Ijtihad, Sharia is the ethical values, not system of law. The difference between set of values and system of law is they are far from each other. Values are almost permanent, but the law is under change of the situation, time, and place. There is no reason that the rules that fitted Arabia in 7th century fit the modern time too. But we cannot say the same thing for the values. Values does not belong to the Arabia or to the 7th century, but law belongs. What is reminded of those rules out of their context is the form or the shell, and what is missed is the soul and the kernel. Islamic rules in the time of revelation had 4 characteristics, at least. They were reasonable, just, ethical, and better function than the other rules according to the mentality of that time. To be honest, most of the non-ritual ordinances of Sharia is non-worship, human interaction of Sharia, al-mu'amalat, do not have all or some of these 4 characteristics according to the mentality of the modern time, not to the mentality of the time of revelation. We should not follow the mentality of that time. We live in this time, we have the mentality of our time. The form of the rules is the absence of these 4 characteristics is not valuable thing to be preserved. The time of traditional ijtihad is over. Its products do not work in the modern time. In the school of structural ijtihad, those rules that are not reasonable, just, ethical, and better functional according to the mentality of this time are marked as abrogated rules. Al-ahkamul mansukha, abrogated rules. It means they were Islamic rules, but they are not Islamic rules. They were Islamic rules when they were reasonable, when they were just, when they were ethical. But they are not Islamic rules because they are not reasonable, they are not just, they are not fair, they are not ethical, they do not have better function. It is the way of minimalizing the scope of religion, but deepening religion. The last points. The Quran introduced itself as the book of guidance, as you mentioned, not the book of law. You cannot find any verses in the Quran that said, هذا الكتاب, for example, للأحكام or للقانون. This is not a book. It did not say, I'm the book of law, I'm the book of ruling, I'm the book of, for example, ordinances. He said, Kitabul Huda, I'm the book of guidance, guidelines of the life. A few verses in the scripture about penal code or the rights of women do not mean they are permanent law. We do not have any reason, any evidence that they are permanent forever. Scripture and prophetic tradition had two goals. The first goal is giving the guidelines of a happy life. And the second is managing the religious life of the time of establishing Islam. We should not mix these two goals. The former is permanent, the latter is temporal, regardless it is in the scripture or in the tradition. If there is something in the scripture, it does not mean it should be permanent. Prophet himself was not able to resolve these problems. God and the scripture should assist him, and he assisted his prophet. The traditional Muslim scholars ignored this main point and took all the content of the scripture and tradition of prophet as permanent. And the mistake was started from this point. And by this mistake, they made a lot of difficulty for Muslims until now. The structural ijtihad tries to distinguish these two types of Islamic ordinances, or al-ahkam al-islamiyya, keep the permanence and send the latter to the Museum of Islam. They are not Islam in this time. We can call them, they belong to Islam, but they are not Islamic in this time. For example, cutting the hands of the thieves. Yes, we have in the scripture, but it was Islamic if we believe that there is something more reasonable, or is something that is we can find more justice in it, or better functional in it, we should obey that, we should follow that, not this one. All of the problems about Islam come from these ordinances that were temporal and restricted to the special land and situation from the beginning of Islam. It's a complete misunderstanding of Islam. Also, a lot of great Muslim scholars signed it. It was not an unchangeable part of Islam. It was a big misunderstanding that happened. A few Muslim reformists discussed some of these points that I made today. For example, the point of the soul of the Quran was mentioned for the first time by Fazlur Rahman, the distinguished professor of Chicago University. And the other points also, I do not want to say I innovated all of these points, but what I made is I managed these major points according to the traditional understanding of a Muslim, especially usul al-fiqh or the methodology of fiqh, added something to them, elaborated them, and make them in a network in the name of Ijtihad, in the foundation and principles. I hope that we find a better understanding and implementation of Islam according to this method in future. Thank you for your patience.